I was standing at her elbow the morning she put the spoonful into the chocolate cake batter. Something bitter. Something nobody puts in a chocolate cake. I asked her what it was. She looked at me and said, "That's what makes it taste like chocolate." I wrote that down in my notebook that night. Food scientists have since confirmed she was right, and why. When she died in 1991, most of the rest of it went with her. I am trying to get 25 of them down before the same thing happens to me. I was 11 years old that morning. I remember the flour on the oilcloth, and I remember that she did not explain herself, because she never explained herself. She was not withholding anything. She simply did not know that what she was doing was knowledge. To her, it was the same as breathing. You do not sit your granddaughter down and explain breathing. Her name was Fanny. Grandma Fanny to all of us, and she cooked on a wood range in a farmhouse about 4 miles from where I am sitting right now. And in 61 years of standing at that stove, I never once saw her use a recipe card. Not one. It was all in her head and in her hands, and when she went, it went. What I have is what I watched, standing at her elbow, from the time I could see over the counter. I am Katie Zook. My husband is Jacob, and we farm in Geauga County, Ohio, which is the second largest Amish settlement in the country, and the one nobody has heard of. If you have been here before, you mostly hear from Jacob. Today you get me, because this is the kitchen, and the kitchen was never his. If you are new, you are welcome, and all I ask is that you hold me to the truth. Where I know a thing, I will tell you I know it. Where I only think it, I will tell you that too. And there are 3 places in this list where I am going to tell you that Grandma Fanny was flat wrong, because a list like this is worth nothing if I only keep the parts that flatter her. Everything I am about to say is written down in a book, and it lives at jacobzook.com, and there is a paper copy printed and bound and mailed to your door for those of you who do not trust the computer and have been burned on a download before. That is the whole of the selling. I will not bring it up again. And a word of caution while I am here. Neighbors, if you see somebody down in the comments pushing some miracle book I never named, that is not me, and that is not a friend of mine. There is the one book, and it lives at the one place. Now, before I start the count, I want to give you something the original list never had, because it is what turned 25 separate tricks into one thing I could actually use. For years, I had these as 25 loose pieces, a spoon of this, a cold hand for that. Then I read something that a cook down in Cleveland had written, and it reorganized my whole grandmother in one afternoon. There are only 4 things that make food taste good: fat, salt, acid, and browning. That is it. That is the whole of it. Everything else is a detail of one of those 4. Fat carries flavor, because most of the compounds your nose reads as delicious will dissolve in fat and will not dissolve in water. That is why a spoon of bacon grease in a pot of green beans tastes like more than a spoon of anything. It is not adding fat. It is picking up the flavor that was in the beans and the pork and carrying it to the roof of your mouth. Salt does 2 jobs, and only one of them is tasting salty. The other one is that salt quiets bitterness. It puts a hand over the bitter notes so the sweet ones come forward. That is the whole reason a pinch of salt goes in a pie. Acid, which for Grandma Fanny meant vinegar or buttermilk, or a lemon if somebody had brought one, does the opposite thing. It cuts through fat, and it wakes a dish up. Anything that tastes heavy and flat and you cannot name why, it wants acid, not more salt. That one sentence has saved more of my suppers than any recipe in this house. And browning, which is 2 different reactions wearing the same coat. When sugars alone get hot enough, they caramelize. When sugars and proteins get hot together, that is the Maillard reaction, named for a French chemist who worked it out around 1912. The chemists call it Maillard, we just call it the brown part. It builds hundreds of new flavor compounds that were not in the food before you heated it. Browning does not brown out flavor. It manufactures it out of nothing but heat, fat, salt, acid, browning. Hold those 4 in your head as we count down, because every single one of these 25 is one of those 4, dressed up in a house dress. I will tell you which one as we go. If you learn the 4, you can invent your own tricks. If you only learn the 25, you have got 25. I want you to have more than 25. Get a pencil. I am going to say the numbers plain, and I am going to keep the names short on purpose so you can copy them down as we go. Number 25. The bacon grease can. This one is fat. There was a coffee can at the back of every stove I ever ate off of, and hers included, and the drims off every skillet of bacon went into it through a scrap of muslin. Bacon grease, sausage grease, the fat off a fried chicken, all of it strained down into that one can. That was the cooking fat for the week. Eggs fried in it, cornbread started with a spoon of it, green beans cooked down with it. Here is why it works, and it is not what people think. That fat is not a fat. It is a seasoning that happens to be a fat. When bacon cures, the salt and the smoke compounds go into the fat, and the fat holds them. And when you cook out of that can, you are putting smoke and salt and pork into a pan of green beans without putting any pork in it. You cannot buy that in a bottle. There is no bottle of it. The one rule she had was that you strain it hot, straight off the skillet, through cloth, while it is still liquid enough to run. The burnt bits are the part that turns first, because the little brown solids and any bit of moisture in them are where rancidity starts. And if you leave them in, they take the whole can down with them. Strained clean, that can sat on the back of her stove for a month and never went off. Now I want to do this one properly, because it is the one I get the most letters about, and the original telling of it leaves a lot of people guessing. Let us talk about fat like grown people. Rendering means melting fat out of meat tissue low and slow, so that what is left is pure fat with nothing else in it. Lard comes from a hog. Tallow comes from a beef. Bacon grease is not rendered, it is collected, and that is why it behaves differently and keeps a shorter while. The temperature is the whole argument. You want that pot down around 225 to 250 degrees, and it wants 2 or 3 hours, and you want to hear almost nothing. If it is spitting and roaring, it is too hot. Get fat above about 300 while you are rendering it, and it browns and takes on a taste, and a browned lard will not keep, and you have thrown away a winter of cooking fat in one afternoon over 1 hour of impatience. Strain it hot, through cloth, twice, if you can be bothered. Then there is a step Grandma Fanny did and never named, and the trade calls it water washing. You melt the strained lard again with about a cup of water to a quart of fat, bring it just to a simmer, and pour it into a bowl and set it in the cold room. The fat sets on top, the water goes to the bottom, and it carries the last of the meat particles and the salt and the pork smell down with it. You lift off the white cake and pour the gray water down the drain. That is how you get lard that is white and near tasteless, and takes to a pie crust instead of announcing itself in an apple pie. Now the smoke points, which is the number nobody gives you. Butter starts smoking around 300 to 350 degrees, because the milk solids in it burn before the fat does. Clarified butter, with those solids taken out, goes to about 450. Bacon grease sits around 325 to 375, depending on how clean you strained it, and dirty grease smokes lower. Rendered leaf lard runs about 370. Beef tallow around 400. The point of knowing these is simple. Frying chicken wants 325 to 350 degrees of oil, and bacon grease and lard both handle that with room to spare, and butter does not, and that is the whole reason your grandmother did not fry chicken in butter. Storage, and I want to be plain, because I know some of you keep a can on the stove. Strained bacon grease, kept covered, in a dark place, at ordinary kitchen temperature, is good about a month, and that is if you strained it properly. Unstrained, with the crumbs in it, I would give it 2 weeks. In the refrigerator, it will hold 6 months easy. Rendered and water-washed lard in a crock in a cold room that stays under 50 degrees keeps 8 or 9 months, and in the freezer it keeps a year and more. And the modern food safety people will tell you to refrigerate all of it. And they are not wrong. They are just answering a different question than the one a woman with no refrigerator was asking. How do you know when it is gone? You smell it, and it will not smell spoiled the way milk smells spoiled. It smells like old crayons, or like putty, or like a paint rag. Rancid fat smells faintly sweet and faintly chemical at the same time. It will also go a little yellow at the edges, and the texture goes tacky instead of waxy. When it goes, you throw it out. It will not make you sick the way bad meat makes you sick. But rancid fat is oxidized fat, and it is not something to be eating on purpose, and besides, it tastes like a paint rag, and it will put that taste into everything you cook that week. Number 24. Cold hands, cold everything. This one is fat. For anything with a crust or a biscuit, Grandma Fanny ran cold. Cold butter, cold lard, cold buttermilk, and she would hold her hands under the pump before she touched the dough. Here is what she was after. You want the fat to stay in little cold lumps and not to smear into the flour. When those cold lumps hit a hot oven, the water inside the butter, and butter is about 16 or 17% water, flashes into steam all at once, and the steam blows the dough apart in layers from the inside. That is what a flaky biscuit is. It is a record of little steam explosions. Warm hands melt the fat into the flour before the dough ever gets near the oven, and then there is no lump, so there is no steam, so there is no layer, and you get a flat, hard thing that tastes fine and looks sad. Her tell was simple, and you can use it tonight. If the dough starts feeling greasy or slack under your hand, quit. Put the whole bowl in the cold room for 10 minutes before you go on. She did not know the word emulsify, and she did not need it. She knew that greasy meant she had lost it. Number 23. Do not work the dough. This one is the mechanism behind 24. Watching her make biscuits was watching somebody barely touch them. She cut the fat in, wet it, brought it together, and stopped. 10 seconds of handling, maybe less. It is the flour that does it. Wheat flour has 2 proteins in it, and when they meet water and get worked, they link up into gluten, which is long, stretchy strands. And gluten is what gives bread its chew. Chew is exactly the thing you do not want in a biscuit. A kneaded biscuit comes out tough and tight. A barely touched one comes out short and tender and pulls apart in your fingers in the right way. Everybody's first pan of biscuits is hockey pucks, and it is always the same reason. They worked it like they were mad at it. Number 22, the screaming skillet. This one is browning. Cornbread went into a cast iron skillet that had been sitting in the hot oven with grease in it until that grease was just shy of smoking. She poured the batter in and the pan hollered. That noise is the whole trick. Batter hitting metal that hot sets the outside in about a second, so the bread crusts instead of soaking, and at that temperature the sugars in the meal caramelize and the proteins brown, and you get a bottom crust that is a different food than the middle. Pour that same batter into a cold greased pan and you get a pale, soft brick with no bottom to it. Same meal, same buttermilk, same everything. The heat that was already in the iron was the whole difference, and it is the one step nobody thinks to take. Number 21, a spoon of coffee in the chocolate cake. This is the bitter thing from the beginning, and now I will tell it. It was coffee. Cold coffee, whatever was left in the pot from breakfast, and it went into every chocolate cake she made. And if you had asked her why, she would have said her mother did it. Here is the why. And the food chemists worked this out long after she was gone. Roasted coffee and roasted cocoa share a great many of the same aroma compounds. They both come out of roasting, they both come out of the same family of reactions, and a good number of the molecules your nose reads as chocolate are also sitting in a cup of coffee. So when you add a little coffee, your nose does not file it separately. It reads the coffee compounds as reinforcement for the chocolate ones, and the chocolate note comes up 2 or 3 times stronger. It does not make the cake taste like coffee. It makes the chocolate taste more like chocolate. You would swear she used better cocoa, and she used the cheapest tin on the shelf. Use it cold and left over. Nobody is brewing a fresh pot for a cake, and you do not need to. 1/4 cup of it in place of a 1/4 cup of the liquid the recipe already calls for. That is the whole change. Number 20. Salt in the sweet. This one is salt. A pinch of salt went into everything sweet she made. The cake, the pie, the cobbler, the candy. And this one is not a matter of taste. It is a matter of your tongue. Salt suppresses your perception of bitterness. Cocoa is bitter. Flour is faintly bitter. Even sugar has bitter edges when there is a lot of it. Quiet the bitter down and the sweet comes forward, so a pinch of salt can make a thing taste noticeably sweeter without one more grain of sugar in it. That mattered a great deal when sugar was dear, and you used no more of it than you had to. Leave the salt out of a dessert, and it does not taste less salty. It tastes flat and dead, and most people cannot put a finger on why. Number 19. The long, slow pot of beans. This one is thyme, which is the 5th thing I did not put on the list, because it is not a flavor. It is what lets the other 4 happen. Soup beans went on of a morning and cooked until evening, low, with a piece of fat back and not much else. 4, 5, 6 hours. What you are after is the beans breaking down and thickening their own liquid into a gravy. That is why they are called soup beans and not boiled beans. You eat the broth, and the broth only gets there with time, because it is starch coming slowly out of the beans and staying suspended. Rush it hard and hot, and the skins burst on the outside while the middle stay chalky and the liquid stays thin, and the salt goes in at the end. She was firm on that. Salt the pot early, she said, and the skins toughen and the beans never soften, and you can cook them till midnight and still find gravel. Hold on to that last sentence. I am coming back to it later, and I am going to tell you she was wrong about it, and I am going to tell you what the testing actually shows. That is number 19, and it is the first of the 3 that do not hold up. Number 18. Save the bean liquor. Save all of it. Nothing with flavor in it went down the drain in that kitchen. The water off the beans, the ham bone, the potato water, the pot liquor off a mess of greens, all of it got kept and worked back in somewhere. The liquid off a pot of greens has most of what cooked out of them sitting in it, the water-soluble vitamins, and a fair share of the minerals, and the taste. You sop it with cornbread, because pouring it out is pouring out half the meal. Potato water went into her bread dough, and there the mechanism is different, because the starch in potato water feeds the yeast and holds water in the finished loaf, and a potato water loaf comes up higher and stays soft about 2 days longer than one made with plain water. A family that threw nothing away ate better than one that bought more and wasted it. That is the whole economy of that kitchen in one line, and I think about it every time I hear somebody say the old ways were about doing without. I want to stop right here a minute, because I have been talking straight at you for a while. It is the first week of August as I record this. The second cutting of hay is in, and the barn smells like it. Jacob has been out since 4:30, and I have got 24 quarts of green beans waiting on me and a granddaughter underfoot who wants to help and mostly wants to eat the ends. The bees are working the goldenrod already, which is early, and I am curious about your kitchen. Tell me later what is on your counter right now that you do not know what to do with. Half of what I know because somebody wrote it under one of these videos. Number 17. Wilted greens with hot grease. This one is fat and acid together. Tender lettuce and the first cress of the spring got torn into a bowl, and she poured bacon grease over it straight out of the skillet, boiling hot, with a splash of vinegar stirred into the grease. Killed lettuce, they call it. The hot fat wilts the leaf down soft in about a second, because heat breaks the cell walls and lets the water out, and the acid cuts the fat so the whole thing does not sit heavy. It eats like a cooked green and a salad at the same time, and it landed exactly in the stretch of spring when the cold room was eaten empty and there was not another green thing anywhere on the place. The grease has to be truly hot, straight off the fire. Warm grease just makes a cold, greasy salad, and that is a sorry thing to set in front of anybody. She kept the bowl of torn greens right beside the stove so the grease did not lose a degree crossing the kitchen. Number 16. Brown the flour first. This one is browning. Sawmill gravy off a half-pound of sausage fed her whole table, and the trick was in the flour. She browned the flour in the hot grease first, stirring it until it went the color of a paper sack before a drop of milk ever touched it. Two things happen while it browns. The raw pasty taste cooks out of the starch, and the flour itself goes through the same browning reaction as a crust does, which builds a nutty flavor that was not there before. That is the line between gravy that tastes like paste and gravy that tastes like something. Then the milk goes in slow, off the heat, or it seizes into lumps you will never beat smooth. 2 cups of milk and a heaping spoon of flour, and the meat quits being the meal and turns into the seasoning for the meal. She could stretch a half-pound of sausage across 8 people that way, and nobody got up from that table hungry. That is not a recipe. That is arithmetic done with a skillet. Number 15. Buttermilk in nearly everything. This one is acid. There was always buttermilk because there was always butter being churned, and it went into the biscuits, the cornbread, the pancakes, and the soak for the fried chicken. 2 things it does, and both are real. The lactic acid in it meets baking soda and throws off carbon dioxide, and that gas is your rise. And that same acid works on the proteins and tenderizes the crumb. So a buttermilk biscuit comes out soft, where a sweet milk one comes out tight. That is why every old receipt calls for buttermilk and soda, and every new one calls for sweet milk and baking powder. Baking powder is just soda with a dried acid already mixed into it, sold to you in a can. Her cow supplied the acid for free, and buttermilk near on the edge worked better than fresh because it was more sour, meaning more acid, meaning more lift. She would not throw out a jug that had gone sharp. She would bake with it. Number 14. Run it to the oven. This is the 4-second thing, and it cuts hard against what most people believe. For a biscuit, she did not rest the dough. Not 1 minute. Cut, panned, oven, and the whole of it took her about 4 seconds from the last cut to the door shutting. Here is why, frame by frame. The second buttermilk touches baking soda. The acid and the base react and start throwing off carbon dioxide. That is not a slow build like yeast. It is immediate, and it is finite. There is only so much gas in that reaction, and the clock starts the moment they meet. Every minute that dough sits on your counter, a share of your rise is leaving the room through the top of the dough and going into your kitchen air. 10 minutes on the counter, and a good part of the lift has gone up the chimney before the pan ever sees heat. Yeast bread you rest, because the yeast is alive and keeps making more gas. A soda biscuit you run, because the gas is a one-time payment. Most people have those two exactly backwards. Now, chilling is a different thing from resting, and this is where it gets confusing. Cold is for the steam pockets, number 24. Speed is for the gas, number 14. You want both at once. Cold fat, fast hands, hot oven, shut the door. 4 seconds. That is the biscuit. And I will tell you what I got wrong, because it took me 11 years to learn it. When I was first married, my biscuits were fine, and never once were they hers, and I could not find the difference. I was cutting them out on the table, then arranging them on the pan, pretty with even little spaces, because I thought that is what a good wife did. That arranging cost me maybe 90 seconds a pan. 90 seconds of my rise going into the air, every single Sunday, for 11 years. My mother-in-law watched me do it one morning and said, "Katie, the oven is right there." That is all she said. She was a lot like Grandma Fanny that way. She would not give you a lecture where a sentence would do. Number 13. the corn shuck wrap, and the paring underneath it. This one did not come from our people. Families here got it, best as anybody can trace it, from the folks who were on this ground before any of us, who wrapped a dough of corn and beans in soaked corn shucks or in hickory leaves, tied it, and boiled it. It came down into settler kitchens as bean bread, and Grandma Fanny made it maybe twice a year. The wrap is doing two jobs. It holds a soft dough together in boiling water so it does not just cloud off into the pot, and it puts a flavor in from the leaf itself, which is the same reason people wrap things in banana leaves and grape leaves the world over. But there is a thing underneath it that nobody planned. Corn is short on one of the amino acids your body must have and cannot make. Beans are short on a different one, and each one has plenty of what the other one lacks. Put them together in one bite, and you have got a complete protein where either one alone leaves you wanting. People lived on that pairing for hundreds of years before anybody could tell you why it worked, and nobody who worked it out gets any credit for inventing it, because they did not. Tie it loose and water gets in and you pull a bag of mush out of the kettle instead of bread. The tie has to be tight. Number 12. Leather breeches. This one is preservation. Green beans, strung whole on a thread with a needle, hung behind the stove to dry for 3 or 4 weeks, gathering what looks to a visitor like dust. They dry down to nothing, hard and papery, and they keep a year in a paper sack. What has happened is the water has come out of them below the point where anything can live. Mold, yeast, and bacteria all need available water. And when you take it away, you have not killed anything. You have just made the place uninhabitable. That is the whole of drying as preserving in one sentence, and it is the same sentence for jerky and for raisins. Come January, you soak them overnight and boil them 2 or 3 hours with a piece of fat back, and they come back. And they do not taste like a fresh bean. They taste like a dried bean, deeper and a little funky, and people either love it or they do not, and I do. The safety of this one is real and worth a word. They have to hang somewhere dry with air moving. Hang them in a damp corner of a modern insulated house, and they will mold on the string instead of drying, and a molded one you throw out. You do not soak it and hope. If you live in a humid place or a small apartment, do this in a dehydrator or an oven on its lowest setting with the door cracked, and do not be proud about it. Number 11. The crock and the brine. No jars needed. Before glass jars got cheap, her mother kept corn and beans and cabbage in a stone crock under a salt brine, with a scalded plate on top and a creek rock holding it all down under the water. The mechanism is a race that the salt rigs. Salt at the right strength holds back most of the organisms that rot food, but the lactic acid bacteria that are already living on the vegetable can tolerate it. So they get a clear field, they eat the sugars, and they turn them into acid. Once that brine is sour enough, the acidity itself is the preservative, and almost nothing harmful can live down there. Same thing that makes sauerkraut, and it works on very nearly anything. And the beauty of it was that it cost nothing to run. No jars, no lids, no fire, no canner. You build the brine, you weight it down, you walk off for a month. The one law is that the vegetable stays under the brine. Let a piece bob up into the air and it molds, and the mold can take the whole crock down with it. Under the brine, always. That is not folklore. That is the safety rule, and it is the reason for the rock. Number 10. Pickle the whole end of the garden. This one is acid. When frost was coming, and there were still green tomatoes and cabbage and peppers and onions out there that were never going to ripen, she chopped the whole business, salted it overnight to pull the water out, then cooked it down in vinegar with a little sugar and some spice, and put it up. Chow chow. It is not a recipe so much as an answer to a problem. The garden is dying and none of this is going to make it. What went in depended entirely on what was still standing out there, which is why every family's chow chow was different, and every one of them was right. Then it sat on the table all winter and went on top of the beans, and it did the job a fresh vegetable would have done if there had been one to have. A little bite of acid and crunch against something soft and starchy. That is the whole reason it exists. In a Geauga winter, that jar was the only sharp thing on the table between November and April. The overnight salting is not seasoning. It is drawing water out of the vegetables by osmosis, so the finished pickle stays crisp instead of going limp in the jar, and so the vinegar is not diluted down below the strength it needs. Number 9. The spring house instead of an ice box. Her people kept milk and butter cold with no ice and no electric at all, by building a little stone house over the spring and setting the crocks down in the running water. Groundwater comes out of the ground at about the average yearly air temperature of wherever you are, which here in northeast Ohio is somewhere around 50 to 53 degrees, year-round, July and January alike. And because the water is moving, it carries heat away from the crock steadily instead of warming up around it the way still water does. That is why a spring house beat a tub of well water, and it is not close. Butter kept. Milk kept a couple of days. A dish of something kept overnight in July. They set the spring house where the water was, not where it was handy. Reading the ground to find a cold spring was the actual skill. The little house was the easy part that came after. Number 8. Kraut by the signs. And here is where I keep my promise. Her mother made kraut by the signs. Planted by the moon, put up by the moon, and there was a right day and a wrong day for it in the almanac. I am going to be straight with you, the way I said I would. There is no good evidence that the phase of the moon changes what happens in a crock of cabbage, and I am not going to sit here and tell you there is. When it has been tested, it has not held up. But here is the part underneath it that was real. Making kraut by hand, week after week, year after year, you learn the feel of it and the smell of it, when the salt is right, when it is souring clean. When it is going wrong, the signs were a calendar to hang that knowing on, and the knowing was true even when the calendar was not. She could walk past a crock and tell by the smell that it needed tending, and no almanac taught her that. 60 years of her own nose taught her that. So I will not sell you the moon. I will sell you the nose, because the nose worked. Number 7. Rendering lard right. This one is fat, and I gave you the long version earlier, so here is the short one for your pencil. Hog butchering here runs late November into December, when it is cold enough to work safely and the flies are gone. The fat cut small. The pot low and slow, around 225 to 250 degrees. Never scorched. Strained clean while it is hot. Water washed if you want it white and neutral. Low and slow is the whole thing. Too hot and it browns and takes a taste and will not keep. Done right, it is white and near tasteless, and it makes a pie crust that store shortening cannot touch, because lard forms larger fat crystals than shortening does, and larger crystals make bigger flat sheets in the dough, and bigger sheets make a crust that shatters. Hers shattered. The other kind bends, and the cracklings, which are the brown bits left in the strainer, went into cornbread. Nothing wasted, not even the bottom of the lard pot. Number 6. A spoon of vinegar in the pie dough. This one is acid. She put a spoon of plain white vinegar in the ice water for her pie crust, and again, if you asked, her mother did it. And here the bakers back her up. Acid interferes with the gluten strands forming and linking, so the dough does not build toughness while you work it, and the crust stays tender instead of turning to leather. And the vinegar cooks off entirely in the oven, so there is not a trace of it in the pie. What it really gave her was room, a crust more forgiving of handling, which matters a great deal when you are making 4 pies for a funeral and moving fast. And in this settlement, you are always making 4 pies for something. Plain white vinegar, and not much. 1 tablespoon in the water for a 2-crust pie. Dump in a slug of cider vinegar instead and you will taste it, and that is a different mistake. Number 5. Sourdough, before anybody called it that. There was a crock of starter kept alive on the back of her mother's stove. Flour and water gone wild, bubbling, fed and used and fed again, and older than some of the children in the house. It is wild yeast and lactic acid bacteria out of the air and out of the flour itself, living together in there. The yeast makes the gas that raises the bread, and the bacteria make the acid that sours it, and, not incidentally, that acid also keeps the loaf from molding as fast as a store loaf. Before you could buy a packet of yeast at a store, that crock was how bread happened, and it never died as long as somebody remembered to feed it. Families passed a starter down like a piece of furniture. Let it go too long unfed, and it turns and you lose it. And if it was your grandmother's starter, you do not get that back. You get a new one, and the new one is not hers. Number 4, reading the fat. This one is heat. No thermometer ever hung in that kitchen, and she fried in lard that was exactly hot enough every single time by flicking in a drop of water or a pinch of cornmeal and reading what it did. Meal that just sits there and soaks, the fat is too cold, and your chicken will drink it and come out greasy. Meal that scorches black and smokes, the fat is too hot, and the chicken burns outside and stays raw in the middle. Meal that dances and browns slow and even, that is your window. And that window is right around 325 to 350 degrees. She hit it by eye because 40 years of frying taught her exactly what the right dance looked like. That is the whole secret to fried chicken that is not greasy. Right heat. And she read it off a pinch of cornmeal. I can tell you to look for the dance. I cannot give you the 40 years that taught her which dance was the right one. If you want the shortcut, a clip-on thermometer runs about $18 to $22 now, maybe more the way prices run, and there is no shame in it. She would have used one if she had had one. She was not a romantic about her tools. Number 3, the whole hog. Salt and smoke. This is the one that fed them clear through spring. It was mostly the men's work, and my brother's, but it landed on her table, so I am counting it. After the killing, the hams and shoulders got packed in salt and brown sugar and pepper and laid down cold. 6 weeks in the salt. The salt pulls the water out of the meat, and a thing with the water pulled out of it cannot rot. That is a whole education in one sentence. And it is the same sentence as the leather breeches. It had to hold between 36 and 40 degrees the entire 6 weeks. Too warm, and it spoiled before the salt had gotten in. Too cold, and the salt would not strike at all. Then hickory smoke, about 30 days of it, and never pine. Then hung and aged a full year before anybody cut into it. And here I have to stop and say a hard thing, and it is the second of the 3 that do not hold up. Do not go dry curing a ham off this video. A country ham done the old way is safe because of a specific combination of salt concentration, temperature control, and time, and the old crews carried that in their hands. And the men who could read a smokehouse by the smell of it are about gone now. There were 3 on our road when I was a girl, and there are none. If you are going to cure meat, get a tested modern recipe. Use the curing salt the recipe calls for, which is there to stop botulism and is not optional, and keep a thermometer in the chamber. Grandma Fanny's generation lost people to bad meat, and they did not make videos about it. I am not going to pretend that away to make a better story. Number 2, cornbread and buttermilk in a glass. The plainest thing her people ever ate, and one that most folks alive have never had. Cold cornbread crumbled down into a tall glass, buttermilk poured over it, eaten with a spoon. That was supper, not a snack. Supper, 1,000 nights, at the end of a day when there was nothing else and everybody was too worn out to cook another thing. And it feeds you better than it sounds. And it is the same reason as the corn and beans back at 13. Corn is short of an amino acid your body needs. Milk fills it back in. So the two together stick to you where the cornbread alone would leave you hungry by dark. Nobody in that kitchen knew the word protein. They knew it held you till morning, and it took a minute to make. I still eat it. My daughters think it is the saddest thing they have ever seen a woman eat, and they are wrong. And one of these days, one of them is going to be tired enough to find out. Number 1. Cooking without a single measure. The one she never called cooking at all. She would have laughed to hear it called a trick. She never measured anything. Not a cup, not a spoon, not once that I saw. A handful of this. 2 fingers of that. Flour till it looked right. Salt till it smelled right. She knew a biscuit dough was wet enough by how it pulled off the side of the bowl. She knew a cake was done by the smell before she ever opened the oven door. She knew the beans wanted salt by tasting the broth off the back of a spoon. That is not sloppiness. That is the opposite of sloppiness. It is knowing a thing so far down in your hands that a measuring cup would only slow you down and lie to you besides. Because a cup of flour scooped on a wet day weighs a good bit more than a cup of flour scooped on a dry one, and her hand knew that difference, and a cup never will. The bakers who weigh their flour in grams instead of scooping it are chasing the exact same thing she had. They just have to buy a scale to get it, and that is exactly the part that could not be handed down. She could give you the receipt for the cake. She could not give you the hands that knew when it was right, because those took 60 years of standing at that stove, and she only had the one lifetime. That is what actually dies, not the recipes. We have got plenty of recipes. We are drowning in recipes. What dies is the hands, and there is no writing the hands down. That is the truest thing on this whole list, and it is why it is number 1. Now, 3 promises to keep before I let you go, and the first one is the hardest. The ones that do not hold up. I told you at the start that a list like this is worth nothing if I only keep the parts that flatter her. So here are the places where the testing has gone against my grandmother, and I would rather you hear it from me than find out later and wonder what else I shaded. The first is the beans. Number 19. Salt the pot early and the skins toughen, she said. And every woman in that family said it, and I said it for 20 years. It is not so. When people have actually run it side by side, beans salted at the beginning come out the same or better than beans salted at the end. And a fair number of tests find the salted ones softer, because the salt works on the pectin in the skin and on the minerals in the cooking water. What actually toughens a bean is hard water and old beans and acid added early, which means the tomato and the vinegar and the molasses should wait. So it was never the salt. It was the tomato standing next to the salt, and the salt got blamed for the neighbor's crime for about 100 years. Salt your beans at the start. Add anything sour at the end. The second is the ham, number 3, and I have said my piece there. Cure meat with a tested recipe and the proper curing salt, or do not cure meat. That is not me being timid. That is me having read what botulism does. And the third is not on the list at all. It is just something everybody's grandmother said, mine included. Sear the meat to seal in the juices. It does not seal anything. There is no seal. A seared roast loses about as much moisture as an unseared one, and it has been measured more than once by people who weighed the meat before and after. But you should still sear it. And here is the honest reason. You should sear it for the browning. All that flavor at number 22 and number 16 is the same reaction. And searing manufactures it on the outside of a piece of meat. So she was right about the doing and wrong about the why. And that happens more than anybody wants to admit. A whole lot of good cooking is correct practice held up by a wrong explanation. And while I am at it, one small mercy. Soap does not ruin a cast iron skillet. It ruined them in 1930 when soap was lye-based and would strip the seasoning right off. Modern dish soap will not touch a properly seasoned pan. You may wash your skillet. My grandmother would have argued with me about it, and she would have been arguing about a soap that has not been sold in my lifetime. Second promise, the substitutions. Because I know exactly what you are about to ask me. No buttermilk. Put 1 tablespoon of white vinegar or lemon juice in a measuring cup and fill it to 1 cup with regular milk and let it sit 10 minutes. It will not be as thick and it will not tenderize as well because real buttermilk is thick with its own proteins. But the acid is what your baking soda needs, and the acid is what you are actually after. Plain yogurt thinned with water works better yet. No baking powder, 1/4 teaspoon of baking soda plus 1/2 teaspoon of cream of tartar equals 1 teaspoon of baking powder. Cream of tartar is just a dry acid. That is all baking powder ever was. No baking soda, only powder. You can go the other way, but you need about 3 times as much powder, and you will taste it, and the bread will be paler, because part of what soda does in a batter is raise the pH and speed up browning. That is why a soda biscuit browns handsome and a powder biscuit stays blonde. No eggs, and this is one Grandma Fanny actually used in a lean spring. 1 tablespoon of ground flaxseed in 3 tablespoons of water. Let it sit 10 minutes until it goes ropey. That works because flax puts out a mucilage that thickens and binds much the way egg protein does. It will bind a meatloaf or a muffin. It will not do a custard, and it will not do a meringue, because there is no substitute anywhere for what egg protein does when it sets with heat or whips with air. No fresh milk. Water and a spoon of lard will get a biscuit done. What you lose is the browning, because milk sugar and milk protein are a lot of what makes the top go golden. And what you must not swap. Do not swap out the fat in a pie crust for oil. Oil cannot hold its shape as a cold lump, so it cannot make a steam pocket, so there are no layers, and no amount of technique will get them back. Third promise. The honest math, and I am going to be careful here because I know a lot of you are on a fixed income and you have heard people promise you the moon. Most of these 25 save you nothing. I want to say that plainly. Putting coffee in a chocolate cake does not save a dime. Salting the sweet does not save a dime. The screaming skillet, the cold hands, the 4-second run to the oven, the browned flour, the vinegar in the crust, they cost nothing and they save nothing. They just make the food better, and better food out of the same money is its own kind of raise. The ones that do actually put money back in the drawer are these, and here is my arithmetic for our house, which is 2 of us now with grandchildren in and out. The grease can. We use maybe 2.5 pounds of cooking fat a month. Store shortening or oil runs somewhere around $4 to $5 a pound now, more the way prices have gone. So call it $130 to $160 a year. And the can costs us nothing because that fat was already paid for the moment we bought the bacon. The stretched meat, which is numbers 16 and 18 and 2, half a pound of sausage feeding 8 people instead of 2. If that trick lands even twice a week, and it does, that is somewhere near $190 a year of meat we did not buy. The pot liquor and the potato water and the bean broth. Hard to put a number on it, and I am not going to pretend otherwise. Call it $40 and call me conservative. Leather breeches and the crock, numbers 12 and 11. A pound of dried beans and a crock of kraut against buying the same food in cans in February. Maybe $70, and that assumes you grew the beans. Chow chow, number 10. Which is really the price of not throwing away the last of a garden. $35. Easy. And more if your garden is bigger than mine. That is roughly $440 a year for this house, and I would not swear to the last 20 of it. It is not a fortune. It will not pay a property tax bill. But it is $440 that stays in this drawer instead of going out the lane every year for the rest of my life. And I did not have to buy one thing to make it happen. That is not about being cheap. That is about being a little bit harder to take money from. And now the safety. Plainly, because some of what I have told you tonight involves fat and heat and salt, and those 3 things have hurt people. Rendered fat. Strained bacon grease keeps about a month covered at kitchen temperature and 6 months in the refrigerator. Rendered lard keeps 8 or 9 months in a cold room under 50 degrees and a year in the freezer. When it smells like old crayons or a paint rag, it is rancid, and it goes out. Do not taste it to find out. Fat and fire. Never fill a skillet more than a third of the way for frying, because fat foams up when wet food goes in. If cooking fat ever catches, you slide a lid over it, and you cut the heat, and you walk away for 10 minutes. You do not throw water on it. Water hitting hot fat turns instantly to steam and blows burning grease all over your kitchen and your arms. And that is how kitchen fires become house fires. Raw egg. If a thing you are making has raw or barely cooked egg in it, and homemade mayonnaise and soft custards and eggnog all do, use pasteurized eggs, or do not serve it to anybody, very old, very young, pregnant, or already sick. Our hens are clean, and I still hold to this, because I cannot see salmonella, and neither can you. Fermenting in a crock. Everything stays under the brine. If you see fuzzy mold, blue or black or green, on the surface, the batch goes out. A white film on top is usually a harmless yeast and can be skimmed, but if you are not certain, throw it out. It is cabbage. It is not worth being sick over. And canning, since chow chow gets mentioned. A vinegar pickle is safe in a water bath because the acid is doing the work. Anything low acid, which is your beans and your corn and your meat, must be pressure canned to a tested schedule, and you get those schedules free from your county extension office, and I want you to actually go get them. Botulism does not smell, does not taste, and does not look like anything. It gives you no chance to be clever. Now here is what this list will not do for you. It will not make you your grandmother. 25 tricks is not what she had. 25 tricks is what I was able to see from where I was standing. She had 10,000 of these, and most of them were too small for anybody to notice, which is precisely why they went in the ground with her. It will not make bad ingredients good. A tired tomato in February is still a tired tomato, and there is no spoon of anything that will fix it, and it will not work the first time. The first pan of cornbread you put in a screaming skillet, you will probably burn the bottom, because your stove is not my stove, and your skillet is not my skillet. That is not failure. That is the fee. Now I want to talk about how all of this got lost, because I used to think it just faded, the way things fade. It did not fade. It had help, and the help has dates on it. Between roughly 1,945 and 1,965, 3 things happened to the American kitchen in a single generation. The refrigerator moved out of the well-off neighborhoods and into nearly every house in the country, and the spring house and the cold room and the crock quit being necessary in about 15 years. The interstate system went in, and the refrigerated truck came with it. And a head of lettuce grown in California could sit in an Ohio grocery aisle in 3 days. And the whole reason for putting a garden up for winter walked out the door. And the chain supermarket produce section opened coast to coast, and with it came the packaged mix. And the packaged mix is the part I want you to look hardest at. Because a boxed biscuit mix is not selling you flour and fat. Flour and fat are worth almost nothing. What it is selling you is the part Grandma Fanny did with her hands, at no charge, for free, every morning of her life. They took the hands out of the woman and put them in a box, and sold the box back to her daughter. In one lifetime, the job of making supper tastes like something moved off the back of a woman with a coffee can of bacon grease and onto a loading dock. Nobody outlawed the bacon grease can. Nobody had to. And then, once we had forgotten, they sold it back to us a second time. That is the part that gets me. Go and look at what a magazine or a cooking website will charge you today to tell you to put coffee in a chocolate cake. That is a subscription. That is a paywall. That is a video with 4 minutes of advertisement in front of it. That trick was given away free at that oilcloth table to an 11-year-old girl who had not earned it, by a woman who did not even know she was giving anything away. and it is now inventory. Somebody owns it. It has a price on it. I do not call that a conspiracy. Nobody sat down in a room and decided that your grandmother's hands should become a product. It is worse than a conspiracy, honestly, because nobody had to arrange it. Every single step of it was somebody making a reasonable decision about their own convenience. And at the end of all those reasonable decisions, the knowing was gone. And there was a company standing where the knowing used to be, holding out a hand. The old folks in our church have a saying, "Take all you want, but eat all you take." I think about that with knowledge, too. We took all the convenience, and we did not eat what we took, and now we are hungry in a way that a full pantry does not fix. Your grandmother did not fail to teach you. The world got fast, and the old ways got quiet, and that is nobody's sin. But it can be mended, and tonight is a mend. All right, get your pencil back. Here is the whole list once more. Slow, in order, for the folks who are writing this down. And if you do write it down, paste it into the comments for the ones who listen while they work, because a lot of people out there are up to their elbows in a sink right now and cannot hold a pen. They will thank you for it. 25. The bacon grease can. Strained hot. 24. Cold hands and cold fat. 23. Do not work the dough. 22. The screaming skillet. 21. A spoon of cold coffee in the chocolate cake. 20. Salt in the sweet. 19. The long, slow pot of beans, and salt them early after all. 18. Save the bean liquor and the potato water. 17. Wilted greens with hot grease and vinegar. 16. Brown the flour before the milk. 15. Buttermilk in nearly everything. 14. Run the biscuit to the oven, 4 seconds. 13. The corn shuck wrap and corn with beans. 12. Leather breeches dried on a string. 11. The crock and the brine, everything under the water. 10. Chow chow, the whole end of the garden. 9. The spring house, 52 degrees, running water. 8. Kraut by the nose, not by the moon. 7. Render lard low and slow, and water wash it. 6. A spoon of white vinegar in the pie dough. 5. The sourdough crock, fed and passed down. 4. Red the fat with a pinch of cornmeal. 3. The whole hog, salt and smoke, and use a tested cure. 2. Cornbread and buttermilk in a glass. 1. Cooking without a single measure. And the 4 things underneath all 25. Fat, salt, acid, browning. If you remember nothing else, out of 30 minutes with me, remember those 4 words, because they will let you fix a supper you have never cooked before, in a kitchen you have never stood in. So here is what I want you to do this week. Not all of it. One thing. Start the can. That is it. Next time you fry bacon, do not pour that grease down your drain, which is where it is going to harden and cost you a plumber anyway. Strain it hot through a bit of cloth into a jar and put the lid on and set it in the cupboard. Then on Thursday, or whenever your beans go on, put a spoon of it in and taste what happens. That is a 5-cent experiment, and it will take you 11 seconds, and it is the whole of this video in one motion. And if you are feeling bold, do the second one on Sunday. Cold butter. Hands under the cold tap, barely touch the dough and run it to the oven. 4 seconds. Then write and tell me whether they came up taller. Before you go, 2 things. The first, and this is the one I actually want. Tell me in the comments what your grandmother did in a kitchen that she never wrote down anywhere. Not a recipe, a thing. A motion. The way she tested something, the thing she added that nobody adds, the way she knew when it was done. And tell me who she was and what county she cooked in, because those 2 details are how a thing like this stops being a story and starts being a record. I read every single one of them. Jacob thinks I am foolish for it, and he is probably right, and I do it anyway. And half of what will be in the next one of these came out of that comment section. Last winter, a woman in Wisconsin told me her grandmother put a peeled potato in a pot of soup that had been oversalted, and I had never heard it, and I have used it twice since, and I would have gone to my grave without it. And if you spent your working life at this trade, a baker, or a cook, or a butcher, I would be glad to hear what I got right and what I only got half right. This community has veterinarians and engineers and retired nurses in it who correct me regularly, and I have never once been sorry. The second thing, if any of this was useful, subscribing costs you nothing, and it is not for me. It is because every one of you is another pair of hands holding the library door open a little longer. There is not much time left on some of this. The people who could read a smokehouse are gone. The people who could read a crock are going, and for those of you watching from Australia and New Zealand, and there are more of you down there than I would ever have guessed, flip my calendar over. My August is your February. Your leather breeches season is coming when mine is finished. Next time, Jacob is going to take you through the cold room itself, how it is built, and what temperature it holds, and what goes on, which shelf, and why. Because a good many of these 25 need somewhere cold to be true, and not everybody has a cellar. The nights are getting a hair shorter here already. The hay is in, the bees are on the goldenrod, and there is a girl of 8 in my kitchen right now who is going to remember exactly one thing I did this summer, and I will never know which one it was. That is how it goes. You do not get to choose what gets handed down. You only get to keep doing it where somebody can see. So take one of these 25 tonight and put it in your own hands, and then let somebody stand at your elbow while you do it, because that is the only way any of this ever traveled. Nobody wrote it down, because everybody knew it, and then one day, nobody knew it. The people who built this country with their hands knew things we are only just starting to remember.